In the mid-20th century, the line between a child's toy and a deadly weapon was often blurred, and sometimes it was packaged right alongside a sweet treat. This is the story of a candy promotion that promised backyard fun but delivered unimaginable tragedy. The 1950s through the 1970s. Marketing was king, and cereal boxes and candy bags were treasure troves of prizes. For just a few box tops or wrappers and a small fee, you could mail away for everything from decoder rings to miniature satellites. It was a golden age of childhood commerce. Among these coveted items was a set of jarts, also known as lawn darts. These were not the soft-tipped toys of today. They were substantial, weighted darts with a metal tip, designed to be tossed underhand in an arc toward a circular target on the ground. They were heavy, they were sharp, and they were, for a time, a symbol of casual suburban leisure, often bundled as a promotional item with various brands, including some candy companies looking to appeal to whole families. The allure was undeniable. For a kid, receiving a package in the mail addressed directly to you was magic. And inside wasn't just a piece of candy, it was a game. A game that felt adult, sophisticated, and dangerous in that thrilling, rebellious way that captivates children. Parents, perhaps lulled by the post-war sense of safety and the fact it was sold in the toy aisle, saw it as a wholesome activity that would get the family outside together. It was a different era, with a different perception of risk. The sheer physics of it, a weighted, metal-spiked projectile flying through the air, was somehow lost in the marketing of it as simple fun. But that fun had a horrific cost. The inherent danger of these projectiles soon became tragically clear. Children were inevitably, predictably, injured. The most devastating case occurred in 1987, when a 7-year-old girl in California, Michelle Snow, was struck in the head by a stray lawn dart thrown by a playmate. She died from the injury. Her father, David Snow, waged a relentless, heartbroken campaign against the product. His advocacy, fueled by unimaginable grief, finally forced the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission to take action. In 1988, they issued a full ban on the sale of lawn darts in the United States, citing their unreasonable risk of injury and death. The candy connection faded, but the legacy remained, a stark lesson in how the pursuit of nostalgia and fun must always be balanced with the imperative of safety. And while the danger of lawn darts was tragically visible, our next story involves a threat that was completely invisible, a sweetness hiding a poison that arrived not from the sky, but from the very ground beneath a community half a world away. Sometimes, a candy's fate isn't sealed in the factory where it's made, but by events thousands of miles away. This is the story of how a catastrophic nuclear disaster led to a nationwide candy ban, turning a simple stick of gum into a symbol of radioactive fear. In the spring of 1986, the world watched in horror as news trickled out of the Soviet Union about a catastrophic accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. A reactor core had exploded, sending a plume of highly radioactive isotopes like iodine-131 and cesium-137 high into the atmosphere. Winds carried this invisible cloud across Europe, contaminating farmland, livestock, and water supplies. Governments scrambled to implement protective measures. In Italy, which received a significant portion of the fallout, the response was swift and severe. The government imposed drastic restrictions on the consumption of fresh milk, leafy greens, and rainwater, fearing they had been contaminated by the radioactive rain. But the concern didn't stop with fresh food. There was a pervasive, almost paranoid fear of any agricultural product that could have been exposed. Among the many products caught in this wide net was a beloved, classic chewing gum. This wasn't a new, trendy candy. It was a staple, a familiar presence in candy stores and pockets across Italy. Its main ingredient was gum base, which is derived from latex sap harvested from trees that stood outside, exposed to the air and the rain in the weeks following the disaster. The Italian government, operating under an abundance of caution, or perhaps panic, made a sweeping decision. They issued a temporary but total ban on the sale and consumption of this specific chewing gum. The reasoning was that the sap could have absorbed radioactive particles from the atmosphere, theoretically turning a childhood treat into a vehicle for internal radiation exposure. The ban, while likely more symbolic than scientifically rigorous, had a profound psychological effect. For Italians, the gum became a tangible, chewable reminder of a distant, invisible threat. It was no longer just candy. It was a potential harbinger of cancer, of leukemia, of a slow, unseen poisoning. The very act of buying it felt like a risk. While the ban was eventually lifted as the immediate panic subsided and more accurate testing methods confirmed the actual risk was minimal to non-existent, the story remains a powerful artifact of its time. It illustrates how deeply fear can penetrate our daily lives, transforming the most mundane objects, like a stick of gum, into symbols of global catastrophe and the fragile nature of our safety. This fear of what might be hiding within our favorite treats, whether justified or born of panic, is a recurring theme. And sometimes, the threat wasn't an invisible particle from the sky, but a very tangible, very deliberate act of sabotage that would forever change one of America's most cherished holidays. Long before a fictional chocolate factory captured the world's imagination, there was a real-life candy bar that promised a golden ticket to prosperity for a small town, but instead delivered an environmental disaster that stained its river and its reputation forever. In the early 20th century, the city of Hershey, Pennsylvania, was the undisputed chocolate capital of America, but it wasn't the only company crafting confections. In the 1930s, a rival company, the Ward Candy Company, sought to challenge the giant. They built a massive, state-of-the-art factory in a small, struggling town in Pennsylvania called Itasca, renaming the town itself to Ward, Pennsylvania, as a symbol of their grand ambition. Their flagship product was the Ward's Wonka Bar, a rich milk chocolate bar that predated Roald Dahl's famous book by decades. For the residents of the newly christened Ward, the factory wasn't just a business, it was a lifeline. It provided thousands of jobs and promised a sweet future, making it the very heart of the community. The Ward's Wonka Bar was heavily marketed and became a regional powerhouse. It was known for its creamy texture and distinctive packaging, a direct competitor to Hershey's Bar on drugstore and supermarket shelves across the Northeast. For a time, it seemed like the company could truly go toe-to-toe with the industry titan. The town's identity became inextricably linked to the chocolate it produced. The smell of roasting cocoa beans wasn't just a scent. It was the smell of security, of pride, of a town built on a foundation of chocolate. It was a real-life version of the prosperity promised in a golden ticket. However, this sweet dream had a bitterly dark side. The massive chocolate production created an equally massive amount of waste. The company made a catastrophic decision. Instead of properly disposing of the tons of cocoa husks and other byproducts, they simply dumped them into the nearby Little Neshaminy Creek. For years, the waste accumulated, decomposing and releasing fatty acids that coated the waterway. The creek, once a vibrant ecosystem, was suffocated. It earned the horrifying nickname Chocolate Creek, not for its appealing color, but for its rancid, polluted state. The water turned acidic, killing all aquatic life and emitting a putrid smell for miles. The environmental damage was so severe that the federal government finally stepped in. In a landmark case, the Ward Candy Company was sued and found liable for creating a severe public nuisance. The negative publicity and financial penalties were a crushing blow from which the company never recovered. The real Wonka Bar's legacy wasn't everlasting gobstoppers, it was an ecological tragedy. And while the pollution from the Wonka Bar was a slow-motion disaster for a community, our next story involves a contaminant that was far more immediate and personal, a poison that found its way into the candy kisses meant to symbolize love and affection. There is a particular horror in the violation of a simple, innocent gesture. For generations, the candy kiss has been a tiny token of affection, a sweet nothing made tangible. But in the early 20th century, a hidden danger lurked within these foil-wrapped treats, a poison that had nothing to do with sugar and everything to do with the machinery of industry. To understand this story, we must step back into the world of early 20th century manufacturing. The processes we now take for granted, food-grade machinery, hygienic packaging, quality control, were still in their infancy. Candy, in particular, was often made and wrapped on equipment that was not exclusively used for food production. This was especially true for the iconic foil wrappers that adorned chocolate kisses and other similar confections. The foil, which gave the candy its distinctive look and helped preserve its freshness, was often produced on the same industrial rollers and presses used to manufacture other metal products, including materials containing lead. Cross-contamination was not just a possibility, it was an inevitability. The chocolate kiss was, and remains, an icon. Its popularity was immense. It was affordable, ubiquitous, and seen as a harmless indulgence for children and adults alike. The act of unwrapping the small piece of foil was part of the experience, a tiny ritual of anticipation. For parents, it was a safe, simple reward. The candy was a staple in candy bowls at home, a treat after a doctor's visit, and a favorite for holiday baking. Its reputation was untarnished, its place in the pantheon of American sweets seemingly secure. It represented a moment of pure, uncomplicated sweetness in a complex world. The twist came not from a single catastrophic event, but from the slow, dawning realization of a pervasive threat. As public health awareness grew and scientific techniques improved, researchers and regulators began to test common food items for contaminants. What they found was chilling. Tests on these foil-wrapped candies repeatedly showed dangerous levels of lead contamination. The poison was transferring from the machinery to the foil, and from the foil directly onto the chocolate, especially when children would handle the candy and then put their fingers in their mouths. Lead poisoning in children is particularly devastating, linked to irreversible neurological damage, learning disabilities, and behavioral issues. While there was no single ban announced with great fanfare, the discovery led to a quiet but seismic shift in food safety regulations. The government began to impose strict new rules on food-grade packaging, effectively banning the old, contaminated production methods. The innocent candy kiss had become an unwitting vector for a silent epidemic, forcing a reckoning that would change food manufacturing forever. This shift in awareness began to expose dangers in all corners of the candy aisle, leading to the scrutiny of other childhood staples. And perhaps no other candy has walked the line between harmless imitation and controversial influence quite like the candy cigarette. In the mid-20th century, the corner store candy aisle doubled as a training ground for adulthood, and no product walked that line more brazenly than the candy cigarette. But when public sentiment turned, this controversial confection was forced to undergo a transformation so complete, it attempted to erase its own history. From the 1920s through the 1980s, candy cigarettes were a commonplace treat. They were sold in small cardboard boxes that perfectly mimicked real cigarette brands like Marlboro, Camel, and Winston. The cigarettes themselves were made of chalky sugar or bubble gum, and some were even designed to puff a small cloud of powdered sugar when smoked. For generations of children, they were a staple of play acting. Kids would mimic their parents, movie stars, and gangag heroes, pretending to light up and smoke. They were a symbol of a different time, a period when the glamour of smoking overshadowed its well-documented health risks. The candy was less about the flavor, which was often bland and chalky, and more about the fantasy of being grown up. Their popularity was immense because they tapped into a universal childhood desire to imitate the adult world. They were a prop in a game of make-believe, a cheap ticket to sophistication. Parents often bought them without a second thought. It was just a bit of harmless fun. The candy companies, for their part, saw a brilliant marketing opportunity. By mirroring real cigarette packaging, they embedded brand recognition in children from an incredibly young age, a fact that anti-smoking advocates would later argue was a deliberate strategy to create lifelong customers for the tobacco industry. For decades, this practice went largely unchallenged, a quirky, accepted part of the cultural landscape. The twist arrived with the rise of the anti-smoking movement in the 1980s and 1990s. As the devastating health consequences of tobacco became undeniable public knowledge, the view of candy cigarettes shifted from harmless fun to dangerous propaganda. Pediatricians, parent groups, and health organizations launched fierce campaigns against them, arguing they were a gateway product that glamorized and normalized smoking for children. Facing mounting pressure and potential legislation, major candy manufacturers in the U.S. agreed to a self-imposed ban on the look-alike packaging in the late 1980s. But the product itself didn't disappear. It simply underwent a cynical rebrand. The familiar boxes were gone, replaced by plain plastic bags. The word cigarette was scrubbed, replaced by euphemisms like candy sticks or bubble gum sticks. The ends were often dipped in pink or red coloring to resemble gum, not a lead ember. It was a quiet, calculated comeback, an attempt to retain a market for a controversial product by pretending it had never existed in its original form. This growing cultural anxiety about protecting children would soon reach a fever pitch, culminating in a wave of panic that would forever change the rituals of an entire holiday, transforming a night of innocent fun into an exercise in forensic investigation. From the radioactive glow of a misguided novelty to the tragic real-world poisonings that changed Halloween forever, from the government-mandated scarcity of war to the ethical reckonings of modern supply chains, the story of banned candy is about so much more than sugar. It's a reflection of our fears, our values, and our evolving understanding of safety. It's a testament to how the smallest, simplest pleasures can find themselves at the center of the largest cultural storms. These candies are more than just discontinued products. They are time capsules, each wrapped in the foil of its era, containing a story of innovation, tragedy, caution, and change. They remind us that nostalgia is a powerful flavor, but it's one that must always be tempered with the facts of history. If you enjoyed this taste of the past, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. There are so many more stories from the America we remember left to uncover. Share your own memories of these vintage treats in the comments below. Thank you for watching. Until next time.